comes in the name of the Lord.
Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker. Our next guests say marriage is messy. They say ours has been very messy, but we found the deepest love developed in our biggest struggles. Through our discoveries, we grew up and learned to practice connection. Money, status, and things did not bring us happiness. Buying the nice house, getting good jobs, having more money, and finding the best schools for our kids did not improve our marriage. The trouble is that our pursuit of the American dream, the fantasy, put us on the performance treadmill. After years of pleasing, perfecting, and performing, we've come to the conclusion that we are enough. We are enough to Jesus, and we are enough to each other. One look at this happy, vibrant, obviously in love couple, and most people would never believe they were once trapped in a miserable, performance-driven marriage marked by a deep hurt, misunderstanding, and disconnection. In their own words, our story is unperfect, but our purpose is powerful. Our journey began with humble beginnings, but we have leveraged our setbacks to be a catalyst for personal transformation. Getting real and living on purpose is our passion. We don't need a little bit of help to find restoration. We didn't need a little bit of help to find restoration. We desperately needed an extreme makeover. Our greatest breakthroughs have come during the most painful and uncomfortable situations. Our inspiration to liberate others was born in our biggest failures. Our ministry style is very vulnerable and authentic because we know what it's like to suffer. Getting real is not a trendy statement for us. It is a lifestyle. On paper, Phillip and Darlena Fields look nearly perfect. Both were graduates of Oral Roberts University with master's degrees from Regent University. Phillip was ordained and served as a pastor in two leading megachurches of our time, and then became senior pastor at a church in an affluent suburb of Atlanta. But behind the scenes, their marriage was disintegrating, even though Phillip's master's degree was in marriage and family counseling from Regent. They started in love with high hopes, but the pressures to perform for unrealistic standards caused cracks in their foundation. It was time to get real. When Phillip faced a life-threatening illness and Darlena faced her deepest fears and secrets, they began to heal and get real. Today they head Get Real Ministries and Be Courageous Coaching at BeCourageousCoaching.com, helping individuals, couples, and groups find this transformation they're looking for in Christ. They have released a new book, The Unperfect Marriage, which tells the real and raw true tale of their marriage story and offers real help for any couple struggling for marriage revival. Here to talk about their new book, The Unperfect Marriage, Liberation for Couples Trapped in the Fantasy of Perfection, are Phillip and Darlena Fields. Phillip and Darlena, welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth.
Thank you for having us. We're excited to talk.
Well, as a 35-year resident of Atlanta, before I came here to Birmingham, Alabama in 2007, I know quite a bit about the work that you've been involved, the works you've been involved in, and some extraordinary breakthrough, the realm of the unseen realm, the supernatural workings of God. I want to take a journey back because both of you had different but equally negative upbringing, dysfunctional role models for what you expected, not what you expected, but what you saw and what you rejected, at least you thought you rejected. But all of us have been at that point where we say, I'm never going to be like that, and we find ourselves being exactly like what I'll never say those words to my child, and you hear yourself saying those words to your child. I'll never treat my spouse that way, and you find yourself treating your spouse that way. And it is the model and the pattern of behavior. And even Jesus said, I only do what I saw my Father do. I only say what I heard my Father say. And so we know that this is something that is inherent to the human condition, that we replicate. We continue with bad teaching becomes bad teaching.
Right.
Bad upbringing becomes bad living.
Right.
Bad fruit comes from a bad tree. Good fruit comes from a good tree. And until you confront this, you don't know. So, Darlena, I want to start with you because I think that there's something that's so relatable about your story. And Phillip, I want you to tell your story because this was such a stereotypical bruiser, brawler, Archie Bunker existence that you read it and you go, seriously, yeah, I've only seen that on TV. Wait a minute, hold on a second. I grew up with Donna Reed and My Three Sons. And,
Right.
I'm a kid of the '50s,
Yeah.
and I'm Jewish. We don't hit, we sue. It's just not our way.
Right.
So many of the concepts are foreign, and I grew up in a family where I have two sisters that are only children. So if you talk about dysfunction, I understand dysfunction. But Darlena, take us back to what your model was and your faith journey. And then we'll go to Phillip, and I want to hear your model and
Sure.
your faith journey, and then how it came together, but then fractured.
Sure. As I said in the book, I was from a small town in Texas, and my family owned the largest manufacturing jewelry business in Northeast Texas for about 35 years. My grandfather started it on his own with a 6th grade education. He grew up in the Depression. And so he made a real name for himself from that and spoke at lots of jewelry conferences. And so our family was very well known and for miles around. And what helped us be well known is that our advertisement for our jewelry business played before the movies began at the movie theater. We were plastered on the screen. So I guess you could say we were small town movie stars.
Right.
We also owned the local mobile home park, but we had the top of the line mobile homes. And but by day, I mean, even though this is what people saw by day, the big jewelry storefront, the shopping center, and the horse farm, and the nice cars and the nice clothes behind closed doors at night, most every night, it was held behind closed doors. We had a very patriarchal type of family. My grandfather was in charge. We all lived on the same property. I say within spitting distance from each other. That's what we say in Texas. And he controlled everything. He controlled the money. He controlled what we did. And when people didn't fall in line, there was hell to pay. And he was also the drinker. He was the alcoholic. And he would start drinking about quitting time most every night. And his target was my mother. My mother was very beautiful. She was very intelligent. She probably would have been the top graduate of her class had she not ran away and married my father at age 16. Back in the day, they didn't allow that married high school students to get that kind of honor.
Right.
So I think that he was probably jealous of her, looking back now, because she was everything that he wasn't. She was educated, smart, graceful. And so she was usually the one that he would pick a fight with. And I explain all that in the book. And my role in the family as the oldest child, oldest grandchild, was I was the golden child that made everything better. And so I was the protector of my brother and sister. And I also, because my grandfather favored me highly, I was his little princess. I would also try and intervene in the violence and would stand in front of him and try and protect my mom and And he owned a pawn shop as well and had lots of guns in it. He had a fetish with guns. And so often the guns would come out and threats would start happening and people be held at gunpoint. Sometimes he would just start to go crazy and start shooting off the gun. And a couple of times throughout the years, he blew the front door off with a shotgun. And because we lived in mobile homes, there's that the front door and the front door and then the back door, the getaway door. And we would run out. My dad and mom would gather the kids, and we would run out the back door. And we had to run through our mobile home park to get to our horse farm, where we had a tack room, a barn, and we would hide out until we knew Papa was asleep. And of course, we knew he was asleep because it got silent. And so that was what I lived in, my upbringing. And although I grew up in that kind of environment, my father was a Christian. He was a believer. He was a spirit-filled believer. He got filled with the Spirit when he was early high school years at an Assembly of God church. And even though we didn't go to church, Oral Roberts' Expect a Miracle played on our TV every Sunday morning. So I grew up with that playing in the background, in the backdrop of my Sunday mornings, which is the only day my family didn't work, was Sundays. And usually my grandfather dominated that with the activities that he chose for us. He had race horses and we had a lake house. And so the family just did what he wanted to do. And so that's the environment, the culture that I was raised in, very sick, dysfunctional, twisted with lots of love, but yet lots of violence and sickness as well. And my mother, bless her heart, she just, in an effort to try and hide what went on behind closed doors, she dressed us in the finest clothes. We were in every lesson that was offered in my small town: art, baton, ballet, piano. So she just constantly kept us busy. And so I was taught really well to hide. And looking back, I can see that my family's greatest fear, although there was so much violence and people did fear getting killed because there was guns involved, our greatest fear was that people would find out, that we would be found out, and that our small empire would crumble to the ground. And so that was really entrenched in me, that you don't talk, you don't tell, you put on a front, you act like everything is all well with you, and learn how to wear lots of masks and armor up every day so that you're not seen and known. And so I just relived the upbringing and that culture that I was taught, the culture of hiding that I've come to call it. I lived that out in my own family. And my mother did become saved. You mentioned you wanted to hear about my salvation experience. She had to pass an Assembly of God church every day on the way to our jewelry store. And one day that Assembly of God pastor came in to buy his wife a ring and came back to my mom's office to fill out credit papers. And he invited her to the church. And she went. And my dad refused to go with her, of course, because it wasn't his choice. It wasn't his decision. So she went alone, and she got radically saved at the Assembly of God church. And because she didn't want to go alone, she would drag me, whether I had a hangover or not, because I partied with my rich friends, and I was involved in doing minor drugs, pot, and that kind of thing. So even though I could barely function, she would drag me to church with her. And eventually she made me go to the Assembly of God summer camp. And I held out to the very last night. And I think I somehow was catapulted to the altar and just gave it all to Jesus. And it was a very radical salvation. I think I spoke in tongues and laughed simultaneously for about 6 hours. And because I had a radical conversion, I've gone after God in a radical way. And that's probably, I'm going to retract, probably that was my salvation, because even though I grew up in that dysfunction and I created it, I also knew how to radically go after God. And I knew that He changed things. And so I know that was my saving grace in our marriage.
Phillip, you came from a Appalachian background. I'm from Pittsburgh.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so I know the turf. I used to be the Wrangler jean salesman for the state of Virginia, so I know exactly the places of which you talk about, and the social construct of the environment of the world of most people don't know anything about this Appalachian life that exists outside of Roanoke on up.
Right. So I was from a little town called Bluefield, West Virginia, and it's it's what holler do you live in?
Right.
Not what neighborhood do you live in? It's what holler do you live in? And my parents, my mother was the daughter of a coal miner. He spent his life, died of black lung in coal mines, and my dad was the son of a truck driver, and that's what he did. Is he figured out a way to make a living, and they clung to each other. Jobs in those days were a ticket. They were a ticket to some sort of freedom, but it was really very fear-based. And so they were worried all the time that their jobs were going to be there, or that the coal miners would stop working or whatever. And so you had these real sort of darkness about themselves that was fear-based and lots of dread.
Yeah.
I can remember sitting out on the porch of my grandparents' house and hearing stories about all of these different people, and sort of the amen chorus, the response of everybody sitting around would be, well, it's this, oh my gosh, it all ended in bad, and nobody ever made it out of the mines, nobody ever made it out of the hollers, nobody ever made it out of the mountains. And so for me, I was raised in that fear-based thing. And so when my dad decided to sort of leave the Appalachian Mountains and move to Richmond, he was stepping out big and got a job driving truck, and really that lifestyle really beat him down a lot. And so when he came home, he just started drinking. And when he started drinking, we all knew what was next. And inevitably he would explode over something. And so typically I grew up with two other brothers, and I was the youngest of three, and he was going to explode because we didn't shut the lid on the toolbox, or we didn't put something away right, or there was something out in the yard or whatever. And so then he would start hitting and beating and hurting people. And inevitably my mom, even though in her passivity she was very codependent, she didn't know how to confront or change anything, and she thought, if we left, where are we going to go? And so she went along to try to keep him happy all the time, and she oftentimes stood between us and him, and it never ended well for her. And so I can remember many nights watching her get hurt, watching her get beat down, and then my oldest brother was really the other one who really tried to take up for us. And so many nights we abandoned to the woods, to the shed, to the different places to hide. And my typical way of handling all that was to shut down. And so what I talk about in the book is how I was taught to just not feel. I was rewarded for not feeling. And so when you grow up and you're a sensitive boy in that kind of family, when feelings are literally crushed, and my older brothers weren't so empathetic either. And so I was in this, here I am, this sort of feeling driven kid with lots of creative energy and stuff, but I wasn't allowed. And so I shut myself down. I learned how to shut myself down. Even when I was sexually abused by an older teenager in our neighborhood, I refused to tell because that was going to just make things worse. And so that's what I grew up in. And then I had this miraculous encounter with Jesus that some people in our neighborhood went to this little Southern Baptist church, and they said, "Hey, you want to go along?" And I was sure, anything to get away from the house. And my mom allowed me to go, and I'll never forget sitting in the back of that church, with the wood floor and the wood pews, and listening to it creak and listening to this man talk about this God who loved people. Mm. And so because I was such a feeler, my dad's anger taught me how to feel. I could tell how angry he was when he walked across the floor. I knew what he was about to do because that's how I survived. And so when I was listening and feeling what was going on in that environment, in that church, I realized that love was real. Mm. And man, I wanted all I could get. I was like, I need what they're passing out today. I don't know how you get it because I had no church background. I thought, gosh, I'll stand out in the rain. I'll shovel. I'll do whatever it takes to get a little bit of that love. So somebody please show me how to get it. And of course, in the Southern Baptist way, you walk the aisle and say yes and sign the paperwork, and then you're in the discipleship class. And that little class with this lady, I still remember her name, Mrs. Kehoe. She taught me about this amazing Jesus, and my emotions to this day are just like Darlena said. She came in radically. I came in with this deep capacity to feel God. I've never seen him and with my eye. I've never heard him with my ear, but I feel him inside of me. And so anytime the anointing is present, that's how it hits me. It's this emotion. And so it started then, it stayed with me, and she taught me more. And so I fell in love with the Bible. And at 12 years old, I was reading the Bible 8 hours a day. Mm. And I believe to this day that's what kept me from, really spinning out mentally. It's because I would, and I'll be honest with you, Rabbi, I know that you're a deep, deep teacher. I didn't understand most of what I was reading, but I knew that what I was reading was real. And it was all about God. I read the old, I read the new, I read the in-between. I wanted more. And so I'd go to my pastor, who was a Southern Baptist guy, and I'd ask him all these questions. And you know how that is for us teachers. We go so far, and then he started handing me commentaries, and I started reading those. Of course, I didn't understand half of what I was reading, but I just wanted to know him more. It wasn't the knowledge as much as it was the relationship. And so then one day he said to me, "I think you know enough to preach." He said, "Would you like to preach?" And I said, "What is that? What do you mean? Do you mean me stand up and give a talk on Sunday morning?" He said, "Yes, I want you to preach." And so sure enough, I did. And, my sermon was probably extremely simple. If you don't know Jesus, you're going to hell. It's like, I probably didn't have a whole lot. But, in those days, I started to feel something, this calling on my life. And I started going to these summer camps and things of that nature. And then one day, a football coach and another teacher came to me, and they had learned about what was going on at home. I was a good student and a good kid in that sense. And they came to me and they said, "There's a man in our community who wants to give you a place to live." Hmm. And I said, "You got to be kidding me." They said, "No, he used to be the principal of this school. He's never been married. He was a World War II vet. He's just a really nice, generous man. He knows your story. He wants to give you a place to live." And so I'll never forget driving up to this old white house on top of this hill, Victorian looking home. And I thought, my gosh, this place is a castle. And drove up that driveway, walked in the back door, and there he was. And, he was a tall, thin guy with gray hair, and he just welcomed me in. We went down and sat down in his living room, and he said two things to me. He said, God told me to look after you, and so this is going to be your home, and I'm going to look after you. Well, that didn't make any sense to me. I had an orphan heart. I don't know how to receive love or, somebody's generosity. And then the second thing he said, which I haven't forgotten to this day, is he said, "Do you like steak?" Well, I was a football player. What football player didn't like a good piece of steak? He said, "I have 2 New York strips laid out for supper. Would you like steak for supper?" I thought I could live here forever. And so he became the dad that I never had. And really, a lot of what I've done in my life and ministry has been modeled after his father's love for me. And it was unconditional. And he just had a way of getting to me. And that's when the healing started for me. But so that's what the foundation and the journey was like for my start.
So you and Darlena, did you meet at Oral Roberts?
We didn't actually meet at Oral Roberts. We kind of knew each other. She knew me a little bit better than I knew her. We met at Regent University.
Okay.
And my roommate dated Phillip in college, so that's how I knew him.
Yeah. So there was one of those situations where you were glad you were a good guy.
So you heard about him through her.
Yeah.
And then.
Well, he was the pastor at a huge televangelist church. He was the youth pastor where my girlfriends and I went to church. And so we would see him on Sunday mornings. That was back in the day when the church, all the pastors came in after worship with a bodyguard and walked up on a 8-foot platform. And my roommate would go gaga over him, and so that's mainly how I got to know him, was through her. Yes, and from church.
So what was the attraction? What was the appeal? What was the connection point between the two of you? Here you are an empath. You are this soft, mushy, gooey, sticky love bug that is all about the heart, Lev Elohim, the heart of God. And here's this walking out of Dynasty, walking out of the JR Ranch and
right.
In Texas,
Dallas.
In Dallas, and the grandfather who's got his feet up, his boots up on the table, and a gun pointed at grandma, and a bottle of whiskey, and he's pouring it with one hand and drinking it with the other because he's still got the gun. So sounds like a marriage made in heaven to me.
Your discernment, you are amazing. I'm listening to you. Your discernment is so amazing. Well, I tell you what it was, is I really feel like it was timing.
Yes.
She was at a place in her life where she had been through some things, been through some relationships. She was ready. I was certainly ready. We were in the middle of working on this master's degree thing, and I was studying counseling, and so I thought, I'm going to get myself ready for marriage. And I was, very serious about everything, and certainly marriage I was going to do this right. And so, you kind of pick over people, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to go with her. This isn't going to work. This is about her is wrong. And, all that. And so finally you sort through and you found the perfect girl. And for me, the fantasy in my head, I didn't even know it was there at the time, was, well, she's got the personality of Mary Poppins. She's happy all the time. And so I didn't have any happy in my childhood. I think she's going to make me happy. And that was the attraction. And certainly, you see that there was a spiritual compatibility. We both had that part that we shared about our lives, that we wanted a very similar purpose. And so that was an igniter too. But really, in my heart, in my mind, now.
Telling is that he had a fantasy about marrying a Dallas Cowboy cheerleader. And so me being from Texas was kind of a perk.
Right. That's true. That's in the book, though. I did confess that.
Well, there's a lot in the book. There's no lack of transparency
Right.
in the book, and it's in the vernacular of taters are called taters, and it's as I'm reading it and I'm chuckling because I can completely identify. So here you are, you're all the appearances, just like it was in Texas, as long as nobody knows,
Yes.
all is well with the world.
That's
yes,
right.
exactly.
It's it's part of my concern for the megachurches is the Christcapades. Is the twirling, the lights, the entertainment, and the message doesn't really go all that deep. There's opportunity for people to go deep, and this is not a commentary on the, but people are being drawn toward emotion and instead of encounter, a real authentic move of the Spirit of God, and it's not a formula. Worship is to be transformational, and I don't see people looking within. I see people looking at screen, and everybody's looking at screen. You can't look at your heart if you're looking at screen. So
Right.
I have there's parts of my old Jewish liturgical, worshipful, introspective, that every part of it says, "Search me, O Lord, and see if there's anything unclean in me, and may the words of my mouth and meditations of my heart be acceptable to you, O God. Be holy because I am holy," and that whole part of it. So you're there in the ministry. You are putting check marks in the boxes. And marriage is happening. You two are married, and you have a face of marriage, a mask of marriage. This is how we will appear in public. He will make endearing comments about me from the pulpit. I will make endearing comments about him to the ladies. I will make sure to move across the crowd to come right up against him and to nuzzle him and to show my affection for him. He'll wear a ring that says, "I am married." It's not going to be it's not going to be a little tiny. It's not going to be a little tiny, skinny, little skim. It's going to be a real, and that's going to be the jewelry. You don't wear any of the jewelry, do you? No. That's it. That's your brand. Okay.
That's it.
I am married. Right. Okay.
Yes.
So you're branded. So this is the facade. This is the look. So what's going on behind closed doors? Is it like Grandpa? Are we to the point where the old is not gone? The new hasn't come. As a matter of fact, the old has been brought into the present. The patterns of the old, the generational curses that we have the power to break.
Yes.
But they don't automatically just go away because you say yes to Jesus.
Amen.
You've got to stand against. This is a war. This is an inner strife battle. It defies physics. The law of physics says that two things can't occupy the same space at the same time, but yet the sin nature and the Holy Spirit reside and dwell right within me, and they are duking it out every day. It is Muhammad Ali, right? It is the thunder from down under. It is a bruising, cruising war within, that goes on day and night.
Mhm.
It says that it has nothing to do with my brain, because it says, so a man thinks in his heart, so he does. Every inclination of the imagination of man's heart is wicked. Everything, the heart is evil. Who can know it?
Mm.
Out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks, and we spewing venom and calling it love.
Right.
So you found yourself at this crossroads. What brought you to the realization? What was it that allowed you to say that and realize that only a broken vessel allows light to emanate through it?
Mm.
This solid vessel, no light can pierce it.
That's right.
Only through the cracks
Mm-hmm.
of a broken vessel can light emanate.
Mm-hmm.
How did you come face to face with who you had become?
Mm.
You got sick.
Yeah, well, you get on this path because people tell you this is the path you need to go. So the path typically is, you go to the right school, you either marry the right girl, or you go to work for the right church, and then you marry the right girl, and then you start to create the perfect family. And so I was on that trajectory. And so I'm caught up in the charismatic movement where, this whole thing is flying, and we're all over the world, and we're one of the fastest growing churches in the country, and we can't keep up with everything we're doing, and we got 800 churches connected to us, and all of these things are happening. And so you get caught up in the excitement of all of that, and you lose sight of one another. And then in our case, the senior pastor basically decided that the Bible wasn't inerrant. There were many ways to God, and he got caught up in some really bad stuff. And that took down the entire church and everybody affiliated with it. And so there was this massive fallout. Felt like I was on the Titanic. And so the way I'm wired is that there aren't enough lifeboats. I will sacrifice myself to see how many people I can save in the process, because I couldn't be a part of something that hurt other people.
Mm-hmm.
And that was just like betraying my own soul. And so in that process, I burned out, and I got physically sick to the point of near-death experience. And so I was in a very, very desperate place. And so then at that point, ministry becomes way down the list on the priority chart. Your marriage, you're hanging on, but really you're trying to survive personally. And I will never forget taking a shower, getting ready to go see this doctor. And I heard that inner voice. And the Lord said, son, I am going to heal you, but you got to get real with me. And it was in that moment that I realized that all the stuff that had piled up in my heart in this 15-year run of doing ministry and everything going crazy, it now needed to be faced and dealt with. And a big part of that is that the two of us had become enemies. And she resented the fact that the ministry was my mistress. And oftentimes that becomes the case for pastors, especially pastors who grow big churches. The ministry was my mistress. And I don't know how many times I looked at her and basically said, you just need to shut up and march. We're not doing this. We're not being emotional today or whatever. And I always put ministry ahead of her, ahead of my children. And so that whole idolatry piece that goes with that, all of this had to be faced. And that was the beginning, my personal brokenness and the thing breaking down on me. And to this day, I don't fault the guy who was running the church. We fed into it as much as he did. And we were all part of the dysfunctional family. But I know my role in that was just like as a kid, I covered up a lot of stuff that needed to be faced and dealt with. And then eventually, when you can only sleep 2 hours a night and you have a temperature of 102 24/7, you're looking for answers. And that's the state that I was in. And so that was, for me, that was the beginning of the transformation.
Phillip, you and I hit a crossroads in our lives when we began to realize something very profound, that the highest calling you and I bought into was preaching the gospel. But that was the highest calling.
Yes, sir.
But not according to the Word of God.
That's right.
The highest calling is shepherding a woman's heart. That was why God gave Adam Eve. Not a church, a woman's heart. And we have so written that out of the narrative. I had to have my legs taken out from under me to realize that the highest calling was not preaching the gospel. The highest calling was shepherding and stewarding, and guiding and protecting the heart of the woman that God had entrusted so that you could be one. And when one is divided, when you split the atom, it's nuclear fallout.
Yes.
It's a wake of destruction of everything in its path. The children, the family, the church, the neighbors, friendships, everything. Nuclear fallout. But you did something extraordinary, Darlena and Phillip. You met this head on. It didn't divide you. It caused you to stop, dead in your tracks, as if you were declaring, "Get behind me, Satan."
Yeah.
You are at the crossroads that many people get to, not knowing, if I'm not that, then what am I? I don't know what's on the other side, but it can no longer be this. It's almost like moving out of the LGBT community. The reluctance and the resistance is if I'm not that, then what am I, and where do I fit in, and what am I a part of if I'm not that? So I hold so strongly onto that because that's all I know. And it's not really a matter of this so-called same-sex attraction. It's a matter of, I don't know what's on the other side, so I only know this. We go where we're comfortable. We're drawn to where our natural inclination is our comfort. We return like a dog to its vomit.
Yeah.
But you didn't allow it to break you. You too found a way to confront it. And you said something that you had become enemies. And that narrative had to change to, I am not your enemy. You did what I did when I was a little kid, being beat up by every bully in town. And at about 9 years old, maybe 10, I walked down to the football field where all these guys have been picking on me. And they were all dressed out, elementary school, 8th grade football team, one guy in particular. And I walked down the bleachers, walked down the steps onto the field, and I walked right up to him and in his face, and I'm looking like at his navel because he's the same age I am, but he's 6 feet tall, and I'm the skinny little Jewish kid. And I drew a line with my foot in the dirt, and I said, I dare you to cross this line. And man, the guys gathered around and said, oh man, Walker's going to get killed. Krause is going to kill him. Oh my goodness, he has no idea what he's doing. And the minute he set foot over that line, I said, now you're on my side.
Mm-hmm.
And he had this dumbfounded look on his face, like I had punched him as hard as I could. All the breath went out of him. And it stuck. And he got it. And he turned around and he patted me on the head and he said, Walker, you're okay. You'll never have any more trouble in this town again.
Wow.
And they all left me alone. That's what you did. You drew a line in the sand and you said, we're not going to be on either. Come over to my side. You're not my enemy. We're on the same side.
Exactly.
How did you do that?
Well, you want to talk?
I would have to say that it was really divine intervention. I had been plotting to leave Phillip prior to him getting sick. And of course, when we found out he was sick, I stayed with him out of pity. But we discovered a program that practiced deliverance. And my mother had discovered it, and we felt hope in it. In going, we felt compelled to go, or Phillip did, and he went and signed himself up to go to the program. And he let me know that he signed himself up, and I'm like, well, why didn't you sign me up too? And he said, well, I didn't think you'd want to go. Of course, I'd become so cynical at this point, and I was so angry at the church, angry with God. He just assumed I wouldn't want to go. But out of my mouth came, well, if you go and you get healed, then only half of you is going to be healed because we're one. And then I was, shook myself. I'm like, well, where did that come from? And he's like, oh, so I guess I'll sign you up too. And that was a real pivotal point. So we ended up going to the deliverance program together, and where I was delivered of suicidal depression, and he got healed of his illness. And had there not been divine intervention and me wanting to go, me voicing that I wanted to go too, I don't really know what would have happened to us.
It really was. It was, it was one of those things that came into your life that, it was sent to rescue you. It was the ship that came in to take us to a place of freedom. And I think at that point, I was so low that, if it had been a guy on the street corner, in the middle of New York City or something, I would have crawled to get to him to get somebody who had answers, because, I was doing all of the things that you were told to do. I don't know how many people called me, prayed for me, laid hands on me, but no budge. And the way that the ministry worked is you had to assume responsibility for things that were in your heart. And so the thing that we talk so little about today, which I think is a real mistake, and that is repentance. It began with this deep, deep brokenness and repentance over what I had allowed to take over my heart. The same with her. Mm-hmm. And so we just said, hey, we are no longer going to, pursue this thing so that we can make a name for ourselves or be on staff or be these people or whatever. It became about, we are sons and daughters. And he wants us to live free. And so we dove into that, and we didn't get one layer over it. Like I said, we didn't get sprinkled. We got immersed over and over and over and over. And so it's been that way since that time, is that every year it's almost like God takes us down another path of immersion and learning and growing and transformation. And so we just have kind of repeated that cycle over and over and over, and it just keeps happening.
We've been talking with Phillip and Darlena Fields, author of the book, The Unperfect Marriage, Liberation for Couples Trapped in the Fantasy of Perfection. A recipe for disaster, examples of how not to be a husband, how not to be a wife. Yet God intervened and took two broken, battle-weary spirits and knit them together and brought truth into their life that for this reason a man will leave his mother and father and cleave to his wife, and they shall become one. And one is the largest number in the Bible.
Wow.
Deuteronomy 6, chapter 6, verse 4. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. That's the power. Unity. Wow. It's the power that comes from God blessing unity if He's there. That cord of three strands that's so beautiful on that day of marriage after 25 years now is repaired with duct tape. It's this long strand. It's no longer sparkling with gold and silver. It's duct taped together and it will endure.
Yeah.
Wow.
Good analogy.
And you become healed at the broken places. And at the broken places, you become strong. If you take a piece of metal and you break it, or you weld it together, it will never break at that point again. Because where it's bound together is stronger than the original material that surrounds it. This is the story of two that found a way in their brokenness, in the facade that they had put out there, that they could actually be who they projected themselves to be. A happy, grounded, communicating, functioning, happily married couple. When they finally put themselves on the shelf and died to self and began to esteem the other more than themselves, began to be transparent, and talked about 7 practices that they employed that healed their marriage. If you're in the midst of it, as I had been in my life, I would have loved to have had a tool like this to help me navigate out of it. It's never too late. No matter how far gone you think it is, God is the healer, God is the reconciler, and God can heal your unperfect marriage.
Amen.
And it will never be perfect.
That's right.
Because we're imperfect.
That's right.
Phillip and Darlena Fields, thank you. Thank you for your transparency. Thank you for the real truth. To look at the man behind the curtain and to say, this is the reality. And let's break the vessel and let God put it back together again the way He intended it to be. And then it will be woven together into the fabric where it is that cord of 3 strands that cannot be broken.
Yes.
Thank you for sharing your story with us here on Revealing the Truth. May God bless all the works of your hand.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
For having us on today.
We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll bring you the next edition of Revealing the Truth.